Sir, we will wait for a few more minutes.
Sure.
Participants are joining. Sir, Dr. Lizzie Matthews, our principal, is already joined. Dr. Lizzie Matthews here, our principal.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. Good morning again, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, sir. We are very happy that we got a person like you to speak on this emerging trend in nanotechnology. Relevant for all the chemistry, physics, and biology students. A lot of work is going on in our college.
Very good. I can see a big crowd actually.
Ah, yes. Good number of participants also.
So, how is the situation at your place? Do you have in-person classes or online? It's all.
Online classes, sir. We are having online classes.
I see.
Shall we begin, sir? Miss, shall we start, Miss?
Yes, sure.
Yes, Rilu, please.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. A warm good morning to one and all. The Department of Chemistry and Center for Research of St. Teresa's College welcome you all to our first international webinar on the topic Impact of Nanotechnology. We are indeed blessed to have with us Dr. Ajay Pulikal, Professor, Department of Nanoengineering and Chemistry, Rice University, USA, as our resource person of the day. I request you all to keep your audio and video muted throughout the session. If you have any questions, you may post in chat box or you can ask during the discussion at the end of the program. Without much delay, let us begin our program. Let us observe a minute of silent prayer. Now, I invite our dear principal, Dr. Lizzie Matthew, to introduce our resource person and welcome the gathering. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Cicely Rilu Cicely. Dear respected Dr. Sister Vinita, Director of St. Teresa's College, Dr. Ajay Pulikil, Professor, Department of Material Science and Nanoengineering, Rice University, Texas, USA. Head of the Chemistry Department, Dr. Jayati Varki. Former heads, Dr. Geeta Andrews and Dr. Ushamani. Other faculty members of the department, and my dear student participants. Good morning to all. It was in the beginning of 1980s that nano or nanoscience emerged as a technology. And after the revolutionary transformations of information technology and biotechnology, now nanotechnology has become the frontier discipline with very impactful results in various fields such as healthcare, computer science, material science, and it is expected that almost all domains of human activity will undergo drastic changes owing to upstream and downstream application of nanotechnology. It is still an emerging technology and many path-breaking discoveries are expected in this field, and therefore it can be considered a very promising area of study and research for students as well as for faculty members. Today, with lots of advancements, nano has conquered the entire world. And we have realized that any field of science, whether it is chemistry, physics, biology, or life science, it is concised to nanotechnology. Impact of nanotechnology. To speak on this topic, we have amidst us Professor Ajay Pulikil, an eminent scientist in the field of nanoscience and nanotechnology. Professor Ajay earned his BTech in metallurgical engineering from Banaras Hindu University and PhD in material science and engineering from Northwestern University. After his postdoctoral experience at NEC Corporation in Japan, he spent 2 years as a research scientist at the physics laboratory in France and further at Germany. He has also served as the material science and engineering faculty at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute as an assistant professor. Later, he joined as professor in the Mechanical Engineering and Material Science Department of Rice University. Professor Ajay's research interests include synthesis and structure property relations of nanostructures and nanocomposites, material science and applications of nanomaterials and the related, and he has a rich credentials in scientific in discovery and technology in this area of technology. To mention a few, he is one of the pioneers in the field of carbon nanotube. And regarding his publications, it really astonished me. Has 1,000 journal papers and nearly 95,000 citations and an etch index of 150 based on ISI database. He has given more than 375 invited talks in related areas of nanoscience at international levels in several countries. And to describe him more, he is also the recipient of several outstanding national and international awards, has been elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry, UK, Foreign Fellow of the Mexican Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Sciences, India. He has been elected an honorary member of Materials Risk Society of India and the Institute of Metals. Further, to elaborate more, he has been part of 2 Guinness Book of World Records, one for the creation of the smallest brush and the other for creating the darkest material. With several collaborations at Rice University and outside, this eminent scientist is involved in multidisciplinary ventures with the goal of developing functional nanomaterials with a rich variety of applications. He is with that strong determination and changing the world through discoveries and development of new materials. Dear sir, I feel extremely honored to welcome you to St. Teresa's College through this virtual meeting on behalf of Chemistry Department. It is a rare and golden opportunity for the staff and students of chemistry and even other branches of science to listen to your valuable sharing of novel findings of this current technology. Hearty welcome to you Professor Ajay Pulikil.
Thank you. Can I share my presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Give me a minute. Okay?
Yes, sir, no problem.
Why am I not able to?
Sir, you have to open the PPT in the background, then present now.
Yeah, the PPT is open.
Yeah, then present now on the bottom side, present now button.
Okay.
Then there is a window, second one window.
I see it's a window, right? Right. Okay.
Yeah, window.
Okay, you can see it now.
Not it, sir. Not it. Yeah, it's coming now, it's coming.
You can see it now, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
Okay, so good morning to you all, and thank you very much for the kind words, your principal. It's absolutely a good opportunity for me also to talk to a large audience like this. Especially it happens to be, from Kerala. I'm of course familiar with St. Teresa's College. I lived pretty close to there for a long time. If you don't know, I'm originally from Kodungalur, which is close by. And one thing that this pandemic has done to all of us is that now, anytime, anywhere, you present because you have a lot of time. You're sitting home most of the time, doing Zoom or some kind of an online engagement. So it's really, a good opportunity for reaching out to places that otherwise would have been difficult to travel and go. So hopefully you will all get something out of this talk. I'm a material scientist by training, and all the things that we do in my lab has to do with how you can control materials at a smaller scale and create material structures, devices, and technologies or platforms to enable certain types of applications. Over the last 25 years or so, this is what we have been doing. And I will kind of give you a glimpse of many of the things that we have done, give you examples of things that we have done, and hopefully show you that nanotechnology is indeed a force to reckon with. And in this first slide, you're seeing actually the central part of Rice University. Again, if you are not very familiar with the US, Rice is in Houston, which is pretty much the south central part of the US in the state of Texas. It's a huge city, almost 5-6 million people. And it's also considered to be the energy capital of the world, at least the old energy capital where the fossil fuels were all pretty much headquartered here. Of course, with the change of time, the new energy, the alternative energy is taking shape, but still, Houston has a significant place in the business of energy. So we live in Houston. Rice is about 100 plus years old university. It was created by entrepreneur William Marshall Rice, and it is a very prestigious, and we are always ranked in the top 20 in the US. Small private university with about 6,000 students, about 4,000 undergraduates and 2,000 graduate students. Again, materials is pretty well known at Rice, and I would say that this is kind of the home of nanotechnology. I'll mention a few things related to that as I go through. But again, this talk is kind of a broad, broad talk about various aspects of nanotechnology, focusing on material science though. And as I said, it's mostly about examples that relate to things that have been done in my lab. But just to kind of give you perspective on nanotechnology, I'll also show a few introductory slides and then go to a few things that we consider important for the growth of this field. So let me take a quote from one of my favorite writers, which is Machio Kaku from University in New York. He said that our destiny is to become like the gods we worship. Tools will not be the magic wands and potions, but science of computers, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, so on and so forth, and quantum theory. It's interesting that nanotechnology fares in this quote, and that is one of the reasons why I chose this. It's very clear to a lot of people that nanotechnology will be an enabling technology in many of the applications and technologies of the future. Whether you talk about structural materials, whether you talk about energy materials, whether you talk about quantum technologies, nano always will have a space because of the kind of things that materials at that scale can do. How small is nano? I mean, you probably already know this, but just to give you kind of comparison, DNA is about 2.5 nanometers in diameter. And it's amazing that human innovations have done things, to this scale. If you look at, nanotechnology is not just an academic interest anymore. It's done at semiconductor industries. And if you look at, the semiconductor industry, which really drives a lot of the electronics and a lot of things that we do today, people are working at 7 nanometer length scale. That's remarkable. That's only like 2 or 3 times more the size of the DNA. What that means is that today we have the tools and ability to really manipulate matter at that scale. And hopefully, or at least the long-term perspective is that it might go down further to 4 nanometers and maybe even to a couple of nanometers, close to that of a DNA. Just imagine the complexity of this problem, right? You are trying to create structures and materials in a systematic, scalable way with a specific dimension of about a couple of nanometers. It's complicated because it's not just a scaling problem when you come to that kind of dimensions. It also becomes a physics problem, a chemistry problem. Many of the fundamental phenomena that exist in bulk materials does not happen at that scale, or it changes its behavior at that scale. A good example would be, gold is yellow for all of us, right? When you go to particle sizes that are less than 10 nanometers, it changes its color. A wire that would normally conduct electricity could become a quantum conductor at that scale, which means that it could conduct electricity without too much resistance. So there's a lot of fascinating things that happen when scales become small, whether it is electrical properties, optical, mechanical, all these have some systemic length scales below which things start to behave very differently. So if you are trying to make a structure that is of a few nanometers wide, let's say a semiconductor device, one has to not only think about the ways to make it that small, but also figure out how this structure is going to behave, because it's not going to behave the same as a bulk material. So there is a lot of understanding and physics that goes into nanotechnology, in addition to the processing, which actually is what allows you to make structures this small. So that was kind of a perspective on how small things can be, and how well people are able to do this, and how complicated it is, and how much time and effort has gone into developing these type of technologies. So, one advice I always give my students is that don't take things for granted, right? You're using your computers, your cell phones on a daily basis, on a hourly basis. The kind of technologies that has gone into these kind of gadgets are incredible, and so many million human hours have gone into understanding and creating these type of technologies. So just look at these things and think for a while, and you can imagine the human ingenuity that has gone into really building these kind of technologies, and it's only going to go higher in complexity. And there will be a time when You can manipulate molecules and really create functions out of these. So that is kind of in a crux what nanotechnology and the perspective of nano. Now, there's another point that I want to mention, and that is this dichotomy between top-down and bottom-up fabrication. Most of the structures that we make today that are functional, for example, semiconductor industry, we do this by top-down fabrication technologies. We use lithography. Lithography is a powerful tool that allows you to etch material and create very, very small and precise structures. And that's basically, going from a large structure to small structure, right? Essentially top-down. And this is the conventional wisdom that we have used for the last several decades, and we have done an extremely good job. I already mentioned that these technologies can work. We can go to a few nanometers in width. So it's been a successful approach, the top-down fabrication, all the way from the Iron Age and time immemorial. We have been trying to do this top-down fabrication. But top-down fabrication has its own disadvantages. You waste a lot of material. You cannot be that precise. And when you come to really very, very small structures, it's become very challenging. Top-down fabrication becomes very challenging. There's another thing that stands out, and it's actually depicted in that figure that is on the slide. It shows that as you take a certain amount of material, certain volume of material, and break it down to smaller and smaller pieces, the volume remains the same. You're not losing matter in any way, but you can see how much the surface area has changed. The same material which had a 6 centimeter square surface area when it was a 1 centimeter cube material, when you break it down to 1 nanometer cubes, the surface area has become an enormous value, right? You can see that in the figure. So that also creates some kind of a problem. If you are trying to process certain amount of material, the surface area really creates fascinating issues and also opportunities. I mean, obviously, high surface area materials are very interesting. It could be catalytically interesting. There are many applications. But also, if you want to process these, let's say you want to make a nanocomposite, these type of surface areas become a real challenge. So the top-down approach kind of gives you this, a broad range of challenges and opportunities, and that's what the nanotechnologies have been struggling with in terms of materials. When you do the top. The other side of the coin is the bottom-up fabrication. We are not really very familiar with this yet. A lot of the nanotechnology work has been related to this. This is actually a beautiful work that was done almost 3 decades ago from IBM Zurich, where they were able to kind of push atoms together into this beautiful quantum coral. You can see this interference patterns that are coming out of the on a substrate. So they did that with the scanning tunneling microscope. So this is kind of a picture of what a bottom-up fabrication would look like. We would be able to pick atom by atom, or not really pick because that will be really time-consuming, but figure out ways of arranging things atom by atom precision, and building structures and devices using this bottom-up approach. I mean, this is an extremely powerful approach. A lot of our biological systems have been built from bottom-up approaches. Of course, biology is very different. It's not as precise as some of the technologies that we normally look at. But nevertheless, I think the approach that biological systems are built from is essentially bottom-up fabrication. So what we are trying to do in nanotechnology and quantum technologies is somehow marry these two approaches. The top-down can do many things, but of course it has limitations. But if you can really excel in how to create bottom-up structures, that would really allow us a new paradigm in this whole platform of nanotechnology. Well, with that said, let me first show you a few poster kids of nanotechnology. Of course, everybody knows about the buckyball or fullerene. If you didn't know, this was discovered at Rice University 25 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, by Richard Smalley, Earl, and Harry Kroto. That was kind of the beginning of the nano revolution in the late 80s and early 90s. The beauty of the structure, although it is simply made of pure carbon material, this icosahedral shell-like structure of carbon-60 really caught the imagination of a lot of people. And that was kind of the beginning of this fascination with nanomaterials and nanotechnologies. In fact, after a few years, the United States even brought in a bill in the Congress to support nanotechnology as a long-term innovation. So that kind of shows you, how people were excitable those days about the basic ideas and promises that nanotechnology held. So fullerenes, the 60 atom carbon, kind of was the start of this revolution. Over the years, people have looked at all kinds of interesting materials. I'm just going to show you a couple of more examples related to carbon. In fact, carbon has been our interest for a very long time. Carbon, of course, is a fascinating material. Bonding, it can exist in graphite or diamond. These are the solid carbon. And since the discovery of the fullerenes, people realized that you could also have other nanostructures of carbon that are fascinating. Graphene was discovered much later. It's essentially one layer of sp2 hybridized graphite carbon. And it showed some remarkable electronic properties with extremely high electron mobility in these layers. So graphene became a very important material, and it still is. And again, you can see the interesting thing about graphene is that it's one of those super thin material. Essentially, you cannot go any thinner. It's just a single atom thick material, which also has its own fascinating properties. In fact, for a very long time, people couldn't really stabilize any structures in 2 dimensions, although there was a lot of theoretical predictions. And graphene was one of those, again, paradigm changes showing that you could, in fact, have materials which are almost 2-dimensional. Carbon nanotubes, of course, is another family of these kind of structures. And again, this was invented in NEC in Japan. In fact, I was in that lab at the time of this discovery. Again, it brought in a lot of exciting things. For example, one of the things that was proposed was the structure property are very strongly correlated in this case. For example, the same graphene layer, if it is folded into a cylindrical form with a certain level of twist, which we call chirality, the electronic structures could change depending on the chiral angle. One was able to suggest that these kind of nanostructures of carbon could be either metallic or semiconducting, depending on these subtle structural variations. Which was also fascinating because for the first time, people realized that a small tweak in the structure could change the electronic structure as well. And that allowed people to think that perhaps some of these carbon-based electronics could be a possible thing of the future. And, this is almost 20 years ago. And so much of work has been done on all these materials like fullerenes and nanotubes and graphene. But again, I just wanted to point out what, these major discoveries were in terms of materials and nanotechnology. And these are still carry a lot of excitement for people. Now, this is a quote from Richard Smalley. He was, again, as I said, the professor at Rice who discovered the fullerenes, got the Nobel Prize. He passed away several years ago now. He used to say very bold things like, he was fascinated by nanotubes towards the end of his life. And he thought that nanotubes could really provide a lot of opportunities for lots of things in terms of technology. And he would say things like, I would like to make a very long nanotube fiber and go fishing with it. Or, there's this beautiful science fiction thing about the space elevator. Space elevators are interesting because not many materials could be used to build a space elevator because they would all pretty much creep on their own weight. So there's only a few select materials that can actually fit the profile, and carbon is one of them. So, people even today are fascinated by this idea that you can make a very long cable with nanotubes that would be a part of the space elevator. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that it's pretty bold to say something like this, because in order to really engineer nanomaterials into macro scale structures and still retain the properties of these, it's really the holy grail. It's really the challenge that a lot of nanotechnologies face. Although I should say that there have been lots of innovations and progress in this field, there is actually a spool of nanotube fiber which have been continuously spun from a solution of nanotubes that is now being considered for conducting cables and so on. It's actually done by a colleague of mine at Rice, and there are several people around the world trying to make these continuous fibers from nanotubes. Just imagine, I mean, these nanotubes, because of their nature and high crystallinity and nanoscale, they are considered to be almost quantum conductors, so very high conductivity. So you can imagine, one day maybe the entire copper cables of the world being replaced by nanotube cables. That would be an amazing thing, because metals are typically very problematic. Metals are heavy. Metals are corrosion prone. So there's a lot of interest among people to see if some of these things like carbon nanotube based cables can replace metals. Also, carbon fiber is a major commodity. I think the future of many structures depend on carbon fibers. Even today, the aerospace is being impacted by the advent of carbon fibers in a significant way. If you look at the 747 or 777 Boeing, a lot of it, the body is made of carbon fiber composites. There was a time when most of it was metal, but because of the composites having much better properties, much lower density, which means that you have better fuel efficiency, carbon has been invading many of those technology space, and it will continue to do so in the future. But again, this is another quote. You don't have to read all that. The point here again is that what is the long-term perspective for materials? What kind of materials are we looking for? So, in a nutshell, essentially, we want to make things that are more precise. We want to make things that are more responsive, which can correct itself. Things like self-healing, self-stiffening. There are lots of paradigms that are being talked about, and materials engineering and materials research have been the core of all these. In fact, somebody said, those who control materials control technology. And this has been true from the very beginning, all the way from Stone Age to the Bronze Age. All these civilizations are essentially called by a particular type of material, and that just because an advent of a new material significantly changes technology, and you get an upper hand. And this is true for silicon. The advent of silicon, the development of silicon has had enormous impact on our lives, with the electronics being in the forefront. And the next generation of things would be related to molecular materials, how you can actually build structures from bottom up. And whether it is biology or whether it is structural engineering, these type of materials built from bottom up, the nano structures, they would have a huge impact. And nature has done this in a convincing way. This is just one example I'll show you about nanotechnology in its full force in nature. I'm sure you're familiar with this type of structures that is obviously found very much in Kerala. This kind of a shell is super tough. But if you actually look at what material this is made of, it's essentially calcium carbonate, which is what chalk is made of, right? Chalk, which is so brittle. But then if you compare chalk versus this material, you can obviously see that this is a much, much tougher, much harder to break, very tough material. And the way nature actually accomplishes this is through nanoscale engineering. These platelets, nanoscale platelets of calcium carbonate has been sandwiched between protein molecules or organic phase in a very systematic way, almost like a brick and mortar arrangement, to create this kind of a highly engineered structure. And that's what it gives its toughness. And essentially, toughness is a property where you can get in a material when you can arrest the growth of cracks, significantly. And the way this type of structure does it is to have this brick and mortar arrangement, so that there are so many deflections of cracks and absorption of energy during the fracture. So again, this is a beautiful case in point that shows that essentially by nanoscale engineering, by this composite engineering, this hierarchical structural engineering, you can create beautiful types of materials with the same composition. Nature is an interesting place to look for things. Nature, on one hand, has evolved over time into all kinds of beautiful things, but it is also limited in many ways by what is available locally to create something. Right? So, biology is the same thing. Our body has some amazing structures like bone. Bone is very similar to the shell. It's also a nano-engineered structure. But essentially, you have to build this thing out of the food chain that we have. So you're limited. You don't have the entire periodic table to pick and choose from. So, but at the same time, it does things in a different way and actually engineers stuff, and it still comes out with this amazing feat of nano-engineered materials. So I hope you got kind of a broad view of this field. On the one hand, there are some significantly exciting, paradigm-changing things going on. On the other hand, there are challenges because you don't have the tools, you don't have the knowledge to do things in a precise way. And everybody is, of course, looking at the future of these things that we try to do in nano. But what I'm going to say in the next maybe 20, 30 minutes are the key elements of this whole technology, mostly from a material scientist perspective. What does it take to actually create these type of structures? And not just in terms of processing, but also in terms of characterization. What kind of tools do we have today available that allows you to characterize things at the atomic scale? And how you can correlate that to the structure. So let me first talk a little bit about assembly. I think you go back to this quote from Richard Smalley saying that I want to actually build a long cable from nanotubes. But that's about assembling millions of nanotubes together. Right? When you do that, what kind of structures do you get? So the whole thing is like a Lego game. So that's many of you, especially the young ones, have done this type of games when you were a child. Essentially, it's bits and pieces, small pieces that you put together to build various types of structures. Of course, in that case, they are big enough that you can see and you can actually put them together. It has got the right features to be connected. But when you talk about nanotechnology, the Legos are very, very small. You cannot really see them. You need some tools to move them around. And if you start putting them together to really build scale, will take you an enormous amount of time, right? So the Lego game is, although that is what you want to do, it's a very low yield process, both in terms of time scales as well as in terms of the ability to kind of move things around. So then assembly comes into picture. Are there ways you can actually create some environment where if you put these nanostructures, they would come and assemble in certain ways. So it's still a Lego game, but where you are trying to be more clever in terms of creating the right kind of environment and platforms to build these assembly structures. Here is an example where many years ago we were trying to assemble carbon nanotubes on a substrate. So that layer of, that looks like a layer of grass that you see on that substrate is really millions of nanotubes that have been grown on the substrate, and they're all kind of standing up in a certain direction, almost like a field of grass. But again, you had to do many things to prepare the substrate, to put the catalyst in the right position, and then you introduce the gas through the vapor phase so that you can ultimately grow a layer of nanotubes like that. Once again, there are lots of details involved in this, and you probably don't need to hear all that detail. But the point I'm trying to make is that to build these type of organized structures from nanoscale is really a real big challenge. And things like these directed assembly or self-assembly that we normally call in chemistry is all we have. And those kind of approaches have its own problems. For example, many of these layers that you assemble have a lot of defects, and defects are always problematic. In fact, when I was introduced, they mentioned about this Guinness Book of World Records. So this is the way we actually got that. Essentially, it is a layer of aligned carbon nanotube where, because of the porosity of the structure and also the depth of these individual nanotubes, it absorbs almost all the light that falls on it, and there is hardly any reflection or transmission. Able to create a material that can absorb almost all the light that falls on it. In fact, these are got some very interesting applications, like photothermal applications, where the light that is absorbed can be converted into heat, and that can be used for other energy-related uses. So I think, again, the possibility of assembling these allows you to do certain things like what you see here. Of course, nanotubes are very small, so you can also align them in a horizontal way. So very recently, we also created a super aligned carbon nanotube film that has got really fascinating properties like polarizing light and so on and so forth. Now, imagine these individual nanotubes or individual nanowires are chosen for a specific property. It has got a particular chirality and so on. And if you have millions of these arranged in a certain direction, then obviously they serve as a macroscopic analog of the nano structure. And again, this transition from elements that are nanoscale to really usable, functional, large-scale structures is the fundamental challenge that many of us face in this area. And one has to think about unique approaches, creative ways of building this type of aggregates, which are ordered, which are aligned, which are almost like a supramolecular kind of an architecture, which is. Of course, the two examples I showed you was vertical aligned and horizontally aligned. But of course, ultimately, you want to have this interconnected 3D architecture that is really the three-dimensional analog. And that structures like this, the question is, how do you really build these type of structures? There are no real tools to connect every wire or every nanotube at these junctions and build up these three-dimensional structures. That's very complicated. In fact, there are lots of predicted exciting architectures that people have shown would have extremely interesting electrical and optical. But to really build them at the nanoscale, we don't have the tools yet. I mean, you might have heard of additive manufacturing or 3D printing. Of course, we do a lot of 3D printing in our lab, but the problem today is that the resolution is still in the micron scale or hundreds. So, if you want to really build this three-dimensional nano architecture, it's still not quite there yet. There are lots of details that I mentioned. Especially if you're connecting two nanotubes, how does they behave? The junction of two nanostructures, how do they behave? And we also do a lot of detailed studies. So, for example, this study, you actually have a junction and you put these structures in the microscope, you go with an indenter in the microscope, press on it, and you take the stress strain curve. At the same time, you look at the structure. Again, the reason why I'm saying this is that there are a lot of tools that today are super fine and complex and quite expensive as well. But without these tools, we cannot really progress too much because we don't see these materials by naked eye, and even by an optical microscope. So you need to have the right tools to build the intersections and interconnections here. And some of these materials, once they are interconnected, have some fascinating properties. Here is an interconnected graphene foam, and it has got remarkable thermoelasticity, by which I mean these kind of material behave elastic at 1,000 degrees Celsius and also at cryogenic temperatures. And again, imagine these type of experiments being done, right? You need to have the tools that allows you to do mechanical testing at very low temperatures and very high temperatures, and at the same time looking at the structure, right? So one thing I really want to emphasize is that the kind of tools that are now available today is remarkable, and that's the only reason why we are able to progress scale we are doing. And another, of course, assembly is one thing. It's important for it to bring structures together. Interfaces are extremely important. You saw that image where a cube was broken down into small pieces. Suddenly the surface area increases enormously. And if I'm going to, interface these materials with something else, there's huge amount of interfaces that are present. And the identifying the chemistry, understanding the chemistry, and also manipulating these kind of structures by adjusting chemistry is very, very important. So we do a lot of work in trying to understand the surface functionalities and surface chemistries. And the way they aggregate, the way they assemble, all depends on these interface chemistry interactions that go on. Again, it's another case in point where you take two different nanostructures with different chemistries, bring them together, and you can have reactions between these. And imagine, the amount of surface area that is available and the kind of, scale of reactions that are done if these type of interactions can be effectively controlled. The other thing, this is actually work taken by Professor Pradeep from IIT Chennai, who's a friend of mine. What he does is slightly different. Instead of nanotubes and nanowires, he looks at clusters, and he builds these very large supramolecular materials, but with precise cluster assemblies. And the way these assemble, the kind of ligands that they use for assembly, it all ultimately determines the kind of behavior of these supramolecular. Now, the design of building blocks can also be creative. I've already mentioned about single component systems, nanotube or cluster that I talked about. And they are mostly built from one component, but there's no reason to have just one component. Just like any building blocks, you can actually have multi-component systems. Here is a cute example of a gold nanotube hybrid nanostructure. And if you look at a structure like this, I won't go into detail about how you make them, but you can. The point is that if I make structure like this, it almost looks like an amphiphilic structure. Gold is hydrophilic, carbon is hydrophobic. So if I'm making these in the nanoscale, these type of small hybrid structures, one could imagine that these are almost like amphiphilic structures, with two different functionalities on two ends. And they assemble just like an amphiphilic structure, like a micellar assembly. And we have shown that you can assemble in one way or you can reassemble in another way. So there's also a lot of excitement in trying to figure out these type of dynamic structures, using nanoscale building blocks as basic units. And if you can do this kind of stuff, you could, for example, encapsulate some drugs in this. Target this to a point where you want to deliver the drug and reassemble where you can release the drug. So there's a lot of possibility if you can create dynamically structures in a very controlled. We also do a lot of energy storage, batteries, and so on. And in some of these cases, we also designed the building blocks of the electrodes. And these three-dimensionally nano-engineered electrodes are much more effective in terms of lithium diffusion if you are trying to build a battery. And again, you can in fact make a battery on a nanowire. In fact, we have done that before. Single nanowire that contains both the electrodes and the electrolyte, and we have shown that it actually cycles pretty well. So, nanoengineering is not just about engineering larger structures with nanoscale building blocks, but also engineering fully functional devices at the nanoscale. So this is a good example where we have managed to design a nanoscale battery by having all the components assembled within a single, within a space that is nanoscale volume. So these are also possible. And again, in some cases, you probably want to have a nano battery to power a nano device. And we have not, again, reached that kind of sophistication where every device is powered by its own power, but maybe in the future that's a possibility. We also do a lot of other processing to make devices like supercapacitors. Here is an example. Graphene and graphene oxide composite has been created to make a flexible supercapacitor device. This is done in a very scalable way by using laser. We also make flexible energy storage devices. In fact, we have actually commercialized a product called a paintable battery, where you paint your battery on any surfaces. This also allows you a lot of form factor. Imagine these days, if you think about battery, think about a block of. But there's no reason why a battery should be a block. It could be a film, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you could even think of creating the body of some vehicle, let's say a car, as a battery. You can have a drone where the drone is entirely a battery, a flying battery. So, I mean, there's a lot of possible innovations in the processing of materials and technologies as well. There's this whole concept of structure power, where the batteries and the power will be embedded in your buildings and structures, which allows you to access lots of things. The future generation of structures will be all embedded with sensors and so on to make them more responsive. And in order for all these sensors to work, you need power. So I think the new modes of power, and integration of power into structures is something to. And now, dynamic structures, I already mentioned to you. Another example of a dynamic structure is a nanocomposite. I'm going to go very quickly because I'm running out of time. So you can also have a composite that could have a dynamic property. Composite has got two components, a filler and a matrix, and the interface of these two, if a lot of those interfaces are available, like in the case of a nanomaterial, a nanocomposite, you can create this kind of an effect. It changes the overall properties of this composite because of things happening at the interface. So one of these things that we did many years ago was to show that if I make a nanotube polymer composite or a nanomaterial polymer composite, dynamic stressing actually increases the stiffness of this material. Essentially, it's almost like your biological system, like a bone. Bone is an interesting material because during cycling or loading, it actually increases its strength. That's partly due to biological reasons, partly due to material that is coming into picture. But you can also have static structures, in terms of compositional variation, but dynamic in terms of property evolution. So there's a lot of possibilities if you can engineer the interface, particularly in nanocomposite and nanomaterials, because there's a lot of interface to play with. And this is something that we have been doing in the past. Now, finally, the one thing that I wanted to show is the super thin materials. I mentioned already about graphene, but there are many other types of extremely thin materials, or almost two-dimensional layered systems, we call it. And in fact, Feynman himself mentioned a long time ago that these kind of layered systems are interesting because you have really strong in-plane bonding and van der Waals forces that are connecting these. So these are easily, cleavable. These are easily, exfoliable, and that means that you can actually have stable, atomically thin material by simply removing layer by layer from these type of layers. And in the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot of work done on 2D materials, both in terms of creating electronic devices out of them and many other applications, control defects for quantum emissions and so on. But again, from a materials point of view, the fascinating thing is how do you really build various structures with such. How do you put them together? And if you put them together in certain ways, compared to certain other ways, would it be different? Because the interfaces are different now. And again, there is large, number of compositions. I'll skip that. So again, in terms of building, this is again almost like a Lego, but here the units are super atomically thin layers, and you could build these type of layered systems using the different layers you have in a combinatorial way, multiple ways. If you have A, B, C, D, you can put A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, but you can also put A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, right? So I think there are all kinds of possible combinations of how you can build these type of layered systems. And imagine each of these layers is a single atom thick. So you have enormous flexibility in creating absolutely new types of layered structures. And this is what people have been fascinated by. And experimentally, of course, it's a challenging problem because you could have not only the stacking in the vertical direction, but also you can have rotational disorder. For example, if there's a misalignment between two layers, then you have a different electronic property because the interactions are different. So we do a lot of microscopy and so on. Not only that, if you have materials that are atomically thin, but compositionally different, essentially you can stitch them together. You engineer them within a single layer, various different materials. That would lead to two-dimensional devices. Antennas, you can make devices, filter transistors, all kinds of things, and you can actually transfer them. You can do all kinds of so much embedded with sensors that you can get a lot of your health information after you visit the toilet. And again, this is just a funny example, but this is the way we are going. I mean, you have seen your cell phone evolve, right? From something that was not so interactive, it has become quite a remarkable thing, in a matter of a decade or so. So you can imagine, how things will happen in the next few decades to come. I really believe that we live in an amazing time frame where technologies and our human innovations are creating so many pathways for us to see what we are all about and what this civilization is all about. Finally, let me finish by a quote from Gandhi saying that in a gentle way you can shake the world. As scientists, I think we should all be humbled because of the enormity of the task that is at hand. I mean, if you imagine the kind of things that have happened in technology, it's not the work of a few people, it is the work of millions of people, right? So many hours put, sitting in a dark corner in a lab and trying to do experiments. I mean, I think we should be proud as scientists and educators. I think we live in a very, a world that is very different from a lot of other people, and I think we should be glad that we are here. We are the people who can change the world, really. I think many of the things that we are seeing today is a result of the major innovations in quantum mechanics that happened, many, many decades ago. And the things that we do today, the impact will be seen, from decades from now. And nanotechnology will be one of those technologies enabling many of the important and interesting applications that we will see in the future. Of course, all these things are done in collaboration and lots of postdocs and visitors and students, and of course financial support from many agencies, research in the United States. And we have a very wide, very eclectic group, people coming from almost 15 countries at the moment, and this keeps changing. There's people from all over the place. We do have a lot of Indian students as well, and again, the reason for these talks, outreach, is to really excite students and see if they're interested in pursuing further studies. And don't feel that you don't have access to, places like the US. I think if you're motivated, if you're able to, be involved in things, and if you have a passion for doing science, I think you will do very well. So thank you. That's pretty much it for me today. I'm more than happy to answer if you have.
Thank you so much, sir. The session is now open for discussion. If anybody has any questions, you may ask now. You can either post in the chat box or you can unmute your mic and ask.
I mean, if there is, yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I have a question. We have prepared some polymer-supported metal nanoparticles for catalytic studies.
Yes.
But stabilization of the metal particles in the polymer is a difficult problem. It is leaching out all the time. So that is a problem we are facing now, the stabilization of metal nanoparticles in the polymer support, attached polymer support.
Yeah, I think that, as I said, metals is always problematic, right? And particularly nanometals. Did you try any ligand stabilization or some kind of coating that you might be able to do, thin coating, things like that?
Yeah.
Or maybe use some kind of core shell. I think there are different ways of stabilizing particles, I suppose. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, sir.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk offline if you want. Sometime.
Okay. Okay.
Sir, we have a question in the chat box. Is it possible to edit or change DNA through nanotechnology? How effective will it be?
Well, I think many years ago, actually, this year's Chemistry Nobel Prize went to the CRISPR technology, right? I mean, that's precisely what they do. They actually gene edit using certain types of tools. That is what is coming. I mean, the gene editing and the genetic engineering, especially using CRISPR, is a major technology for the future. So I think if you're interested, go and read about the CRISPR technology, which actually got the Nobel Prize this year in chemistry.
Okay. So we have another question from Sister Alfonso Thomas. Is it possible to doping acetylene black with zinc oxide?
I don't know. I don't work too much in zinc oxide. I mean, of course, if you react zinc oxide with acetylene, you might get a carbon coating, I would think. But zinc oxide is obviously a very interesting material. It's catalytic. It's got some very nice optical behavior. I don't know what the motivation for doping with acetylene is, but certainly people have doped zinc oxide with various things, various elements.
So I assume there are no more questions. If anybody has any more question, you can either post in the chat box, you can unmute and ask.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, again, these days everybody's information is available, so you can always email me as well, jn@rice.edu, or any question. But it doesn't even have to be technical. I'm happy to answer.
So we have one more question from Mr. Adityan Kutukurdi. So what are the expected impacts of quantum dots in future?
So I think the quantum dots have already, had many applications, right? Especially the LEDs and the displays that you see. Many of them have embedded quantum dots. I mean, again, in biological systems, it's used as a tracer, for example. Quantum dots have been, quite effective in integrating into some of the technologies. Again, some of the quantum dots, of course, like the cadmium sulfide selenide, had some toxicity issues, but there are other quantum dots that have been quite effective.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have also a question. If these nanoparticles are used in drug delivery applications, how would the biodegradability of these nanoparticles if they are used in drug delivery applications? Because I worked with some peptide nanoparticles, so.
Yeah, so most of the time the drug delivery systems are polymeric nanoparticles that would have biodegradability, right? I mean, metal particles would be, again, I think the only way you can get rid of them is, it has to flush through the system and come out. Obviously it doesn't have the biodegradable side. So I think that's again the reason why people focus on polymeric and soft material delivery agent.
Sir, we have one more question from Mr. S. Prasad. What is the importance of quantum dots prepared from GCN?
From what?
GCN.
I don't know. I mean, that's probably a very specific question for a particular reagent, I suppose. I'm not familiar.
So I think we have one more question from Archana PN. Which technique can be effectively used to distinguish reduced graphene oxide and graphene?
So a lot of work on graphene-based systems. Of course, if you want to prepare graphene in bulk, the possibility is to go through exfoliating graphite, which will give you oxidized graphite oxide, and then you reduce it, right? So obviously, if you compare graphene and reduced graphene oxide would still be more, somewhat chemically modified. It doesn't probably have the level of functionalities that graphene oxide has, but it still has some, and that might decrease its conductivity. But I think reduced graphene oxide is mostly used for reasonable conductivity, and for example, in battery electrodes, supercapacitor electrodes, where the electrochemical performance and conductivity are kind of go hand in hand. So again, the answer to that question is graphene is pristine, carbon-based, where reduced graphene oxide would have some functionalities with oxygen and hydrogen functional groups.
So I think we've come to the end of the question answer session. I hope there are no more queries. I now invite our dear HOD, Dr. Jayati Varki, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Relu. Respected Chief Guest of the Day, Professor Ajay Pulikal, Director Dr. Svetnida, Principal Dr. Lizzie Matthew, dear teachers and my dear students. I feel honored and privileged to thank Professor Ajay Pulikal for his inspiring lecture. In fact, it is a long-cherished dream come true for our department. In spite of all his busy schedule, Professor Ajay has agreed to our invitation and gave an excellent talk on impact of nanotechnology. I'm pretty sure that our student community will be highly motivated to nano world by this lecture, a world-renowned professor. On behalf of Department of Chemistry, St. Teresa's College, and all the participants here, I thank you, Professor Ajay, for this wonderful lecture. Our director, Sister Vinita, for her inspiration. I also thank our principal, Dr. Lizzie Matthew, for her welcome address. I record my sincere gratitude to all the participants here. A big thank you to other coordinators, Cyril Joseph and Nivedita, for all their hard work for the smooth conduct of this webinar. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. And
thank you very much, sir.
Yes, see you then. Take care.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. For the attention of the participants, I have posted a feedback form posted in the chat box. You can answer the feedback, and after that, you will be receiving your certificate. I repeat, a feedback form is posted in the chat box. You may fill in the feedback form to receive your certificate. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jana. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you all.